Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are ready to coming this second day of our meeting. I want to come to congratulate all the women present in this hall, not only MP, but from the Secretariat, the woman for the translation, with the occasion of this important day for all men in the world. And I dedicate this day to this our work day to the women for their participation. It was really very important in this conference in a so great number. Thank you very much. I open the session and I give the floor to my colleagues. The President of the Committee of Defense of the Chambers of Deputies, Mr. Capra.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before beginning the session, I would like to call on the dais the head of the Finnish delegation in order to be delivered the invitation to the following edition of the Interparliamentary Conference. So the head of the Finnish delegation.
Romanian hosts, dear colleagues, first of all, I want to wish also Happy Women's Day to all gorgeous, wonderful ladies here. In my capacity as head of the Finnish delegation, I would like to say a few words about the upcoming Finnish EU presidency. As you all know, Finland will hold the EU presidency during the second half of this year after Romania. During our presidency, we have the pleasure of organizing this parliamentary conference in Finland. The seminar will be held from the 4th to the 6th of September 2019 in Helsinki. The main themes for our conference very much follow the Romanian presidency topics, which should be ensured the continuation of our interparliamentary discussion. In concrete terms, we will continue dealing with the European defense dimension as well as hybrid and cyber threats, which can't be avoided today while discussing on security policy. Western Balkans also remains of a great importance for all us. In addition, we will touch upon the transatlantic relationship, the Arctic policy, High North issues and the implications of climate change for our foreign and security policy. I want to thank Romania for hosting and organizing this seminar here in Bucharest. You have a wonderful country. Everything has gone fine and very well. We try to do our best to organizing as good meeting as you did here. With these words, I would like to welcome you all. Helsinki in September. Thank you. I hope to see you all in the country of Santa Claus, Finland.
Thank you very much. Now, coming back to the topics of the session organized this morning, we need to emphasize that the current geopolitical context has changed dramatically in the last decade. The situation in the neighboring regions has become unstable. It is characterized equally by the occurrence of new hybrid threats, but also through the conventional challenges or by the conventional challenges. In the context when the member states remain sovereign with regard to decisions in the field of defense, it was seen that national defense programs developed individually by the member states do not answer fully the critical requirements of EU military capabilities, and that led to a deficit in capabilities. Consequently, when EU's global security strategy was drafted, the decision makers had into account or took into account the importance of the cooperation amongst the member states in the field of defense and the need to use the instruments provided in the Lisbon Treaty and the potential of the European Defence Agency to support defence capabilities development. Even though quite recently there have been positive messages with regard to the stabilization and the increase of the national funding for defense, and although Romania is one of the member states that earmarked 2% of their GDP in this sector in the past 3 years, we still need to put in a significant additional efforts to maximize the efficiency of investments in the common defense. The prospects of the European defense through the lens of the efforts carried out at the European level in order to launch and implement some certain initiatives in the area of common defense and security policy. So all these perspectives create the image of the need to politically guarantee a series of urgent measures. Romania has priorities during its presidency aimed at continuing the initiatives associated and to continue the annual coordinated revision and the European Defence Fund. CARD, PESCO and EDF represent complementary instruments supporting the efforts of the member states with a view to consolidating defence capacities. CARD helps identifying opportunities for new initiatives of cooperation, and under the PESCO umbrella, projects are being developed to address the priorities identified by the EU member states, taking into account the CARD results. The eligible projects could benefit of funding through the EDF. The European Defence Fund is aimed to, or is meant to be, an instrument to promote competitiveness and the capacity of innovation of the industrial base and European defence technology, thus contributing to the EU strategic autonomy. Without dwelling too much on this topic that will surely be treated in a complex manner by the invited experts, let me give the floor to Minister Mihnea Motok, now a diplomat, former defense minister, now the vice director of the European Center for Strategic Policies. Mr. Motok, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, for this very kind introduction and a warm welcome to everyone at this first session of the day. I too take a sheer pleasure in expressing my warmest thoughts for our wonderful ladies here in the room. May we have a great day today. This is very special for us. Let me start by saying that it was with great pleasure that I took up this opportunity to play a moderating role on this first panel of the day, not only because the Interparliamentary Conference is organized by the member state, the country I know best, Romania, although this was of course very important, but also because of the importance of the defense policy initiatives that are featuring on the menu for today. They are very aptly reunited under this name CSDP triangle, and indeed EDF, the European Defence Fund, PESCO, the Permanent Structure Cooperation on Defence, and the CARD, the Comprehensive Annual Defence Review, they are pillars of our member states' tremendous push for European defence over the last 3 years or so. Setting these initiatives up, I believe, was the optimal way of relaunching the European defense project And having them up and running in a plenary way will be, I am persuaded, core to the future European Defence Union. So to take you very succinctly through them and put it quite simplistically, CARD gives us the opportunity to take a comprehensive overview of defense capabilities in our member states, and thus offers us the possibility to identify new ways, new avenues for defense cooperation. PESCO is the enhanced policy framework and vehicle for delivering, for advancing CSDP, our common defense and security policy, and also in a very brief description, the European Defense Fund somehow at the end of this process is actually pumping financial resources into cooperative projects on defense R&D, on defense research and development. So having said that, I think we are quite lucky to have a great panel of distinguished speakers to take up these important topics today. They are certainly going to give us a rich variety of insights into these topics. Before I invite them to the floor, let me remind a few rules for the road. I plan to ask each of our distinguished speakers to give us their initial thoughts for not more than 8 or 10 minutes, so as to allow afterwards, with their concurrence, to engage into a 30-minute Q&A session, and at the end I plan to get back to them and ask them for their, also in a very brief manner, for their parting thoughts from this conference. So I now turn to the first panelist, and I am very pleased to talk about Jorge Domecq. Jorge, you are actually very well known, especially here in Romania. You have a lot of friends. I am extremely privileged to count myself among those friends, I hope. And, but I'll just say that as Chief Executive of the European Defence Agency since February 2015, he was really the man for the task, because his leadership basically overlapped with all this progress that we've seen on European defense. And under his steer, the agency extended invaluable support to practically all the European defense initiatives that we are talking about, and in particular with regard to running the first trial for CARD, and delivering or supporting the implementation of the preparatory action on defense research. I think you'll agree, we're very fortunate to have him with us today. And without any further ado, Jorge, the floor is all yours.
Good morning, distinguished representatives of the national parliaments and the European Parliament, dear co-panelists, State Secretary, moderator, dear Minea. Allow me to start by thanking the Romanian Parliament for organizing this event and for the invitation to speak on this panel. I am very pleased that the new defense initiatives of CARD, PESCO and EDF are among the selected topics of this conference, especially having in mind their importance for the future of European defense. Also, the title of the panel, CSDP Triangle, is very well framed, as it depicts the aimed connections and interlinks between these three initiatives. In my opening remarks, I would just like to give you an overview of the implementation of the initiatives, taking into account the role the European Defence Agency is playing in all three of them. I will also focus on the coherence of these initiatives and the way forward. Allow me to begin a few years back, in spring 2017, the last time I have joined you at the Interparliamentary Conference in La Valletta, organized by the Maltese Presidency in April. of that year. At that moment, only 2 years ago, we only had a general vision set out in the global strategy in which direction we wanted to take European security and defense, based on the newly introduced principle of EU as a security provider. So EU would also guarantee the security of its citizens and territory, complemented with an appropriate level of ambition and strategic autonomy. We had the idea of a defense package and its 3 initiatives only on paper, with no concrete actions yet on neither CARD, EDF, PESCO, or the Capability Development Plan. And a lot has happened since we met in Malta in 2017. 3 key defense initiatives, CARD, PESCO, and EDF, were launched in 2017 and shaped into their current form in the course of 2018. The capability development priorities have been reviewed and developed in the framework of EDA. The remarkable speed and the willingness among member states to set up and support this defense package further highlights the importance we've all put on the security and defense in Europe today. And that brings me to where we are now, 2 years later, the year 2019 being the year of implementation of the defense package. The established initiatives now represent the nucleus of an EU defense planning process with no further need to invent any new processes and tools. It is now key to reinforce the tools that exist, to consolidate them and to embed them into the national defense planning systems, which require a change of mindset and a sense of ownership from the side of member states, from the ministries of defense, our elected parliaments, the military, the defense industry, and the research centers across Europe. And before touching on the 3 main initiatives, allow me to present to you the baseline of all of them. The Capability Development Program, the CDP. CDP serves as a tool for common priority setting in the area of defense capabilities, and not only for CSDP missions and operations, but even the most demanding missions, but taking into account the full level of ambition foreseen in the EU global strategy, as well as our national plans. The CSDP operational requirements are part of this full spectrum approach to capability development. The revised CDP and the 2018 EU capability development priorities tell us what to focus EU common efforts on. Today, the EU capability development priorities have a vital role in ensuring consistency among the various initiatives by providing, as I said before, the baseline for assessing member states' defense efforts in CARD, guiding project proposals in the binding PESCO framework, and informing the current and future work program of the European Defence Fund. By basing all 3 initiatives on those priorities, we will ensure a coherent and capability-driven, not industry-driven approach. And all these priorities also have to be coherent with NATO's defense planning process, respecting the principle of the single set of forces and capabilities that applies to 21 of our member states. And this brings me to CARD, the regular biannual coordinated review of defense. CARD, as Minea was saying before, aims to monitor the implementation of the capability development priorities, provide us with an overview of the European capability landscape, and serve as a pathfinder for future collaborative projects that can be done in the framework of PESCO. For the first time, EDA, as the Secretariat of CARD, through the regular bilateral consultations during the trial run last year, gathered information from member states on their defense spending plans and policies, as well as their defense investment, with a view to identify capability shortfalls and promote coherence as well as identify possibilities for cooperation. And we have now completed that test phase, and the CARD trial run report was positively received and approved by Ministers of Defense in November. Already in this limited trial run, many opportunities for European defense collaboration were identified. Some examples are short-range air defense, armored vehicles including main battle tanks, helicopters, medical support, cyber defense, and satellite communications. And the first full CARD cycle will start this autumn, making the process a standing exercise. And while CARD should serve as a pathfinder for possible PESCO projects, PESCO gives us options on how to move forward on concrete projects for capability development in a collaborative and structured manner. So far, 34 collaborative projects have been agreed in the PESCO framework, and the latest set of 17 projects was adopted by Council in November. The next call will be issued the coming spring. And it is important for PESCO projects to derive from CDP and CARD, so we implement projects that we need, rather than ones nice to have, and projects that respond not only to our operational requirements in CSDP, but also in NATO or nationally. That responds also to the relevant PESCO commitment, which says member states are committed to help to overcome capability shortcomings identified under the CDP and CARD. These capability projects shall increase Europe's strategic autonomy and strengthen the European defense technological and industrial base. If we look at the projects being developed in PESCO so far, we can see that member states are focusing to a certain extent on the needs identified through CDP, such as the male RPAS, infantry fighting vehicles, or Europe's secure software-defined radio. EDA, together with the EU military staff, again functions as PESCO Secretariat, assessing and consolidating concrete PESCO projects. Before the next set of projects, the Secretariat will assess the progress made and present a report on lessons learned. And when we talk about PESCO, next to the concrete projects, it's important to also emphasize the binding nature of this initiative, of the PESCO commitments, through which 25 of our member states have committed themselves to invest together, to operate together, and to develop capabilities together. This will bring convergence and long-term integration of the defense sector. It is the binding nature that makes the difference between PESCO and all other collective defense frameworks before. And finally, the third important initiative of the defense package is the European Defence Fund, that for the first time provides major EU funding for defense-related research and cooperative defense projects, with a bonus if in PESCO. In this test phase for the future European Defence Fund, the Commission has devoted 590 million euros of the EU budget until 2020 in the framework of the Preparatory Action on Defence Research and the European Defence Industrial Development Programme. The European Parliament also played its role through SEDE subcommittee, who initiated the test case pilot project, the predecessor of the Preparatory Action. And EDA is playing a role upstream in both the EDIDP and the Preparatory Action. In EDIDP, by providing views and recommendations in the Programme Committee, which led to an EDIP work programme and CDP, and in the Preparatory Action by providing input in the definition of the work programme and drafting of technical specifications of calls. Furthermore, in the Preparatory Action, EDA is the implementing body through a delegation agreement with the Commission, and through that role, it is ensuring that the results of dedicated research going to concrete programs and activities of the defense sector. For example, the pilot project activity Euroswarm, which was financed under the pilot project, is already being followed up. The technological working group navigation of the agency has already prepared an outline description for an ad hoc project, and a couple of member states have expressed their interest to participate and are now discussing the respective budget. Also, the largest project under the preparatory action, Ocean 2020, a maritime air awareness demonstrator, is created exactly from the end users, the Navy's perspective, and we expect a similar uptake. And regarding the future European Defence Fund, with the 13 billion euros proposed by the Commission in the next multi-annual financial framework, that could make the European Union the fourth biggest investor in European defence. For EDF to succeed, same as in the case of PESCO, a capability-driven approach needs to be ensured so that the projects are based on what member states need. EDF should not become an industrial subvention subsidy. In the implementation of the European Defence Fund, it will also be essential to build on the lessons identified in the preparatory action and EDIDP, and to avoid any duplication of structures at a time of increasing demand of human resources in this sector. And allow me to focus now on the importance of the coherence of the presented initiatives. Put together, all of the initiatives, CARD, PESCO and EDF, give an end-to-end coherent defence planning framework, taking into account the EU CSDP needs, national needs, as well as NATO needs. An EDA, in close cooperation with the European Commission, the EU military staff, the External Action Service, the EU Military Committee, and the European, plays a key role in the implementation of all three initiatives, and is ensuring the needed coherence and non-duplication between them. EDA is the secretariat for the CARD process, part of the PESCO secretariat together with the External Action Service and UMS, and is implementing the preparatory action and provides its views for the EDIDP and the EDF Program Committee. Let's not forget also that the CDP, the baseline prioritization tool, for which EDA serves as a platform and integrator of the input, including from the UMS and the Military Committee. The High Representative, Vice President and Head of the agency was tasked by the Council to present by mid this year a forward-looking report on the interactions, links and coherence between these initiatives, including the coordination between the supporting institutions and bodies at EU level. It is essential to ensure that all actors in this process, which I mentioned before, from the External Action Service to the UMS, from the Military Committee to the Commission and EDA, look in the same direction, and that all defense-related communities are involved and in tune. This also requires the capitals to be more coordinated than before, both from an executive as well as from the legislative side. To conclude, allow me to once again emphasize the need to maintain the commitments, consolidate the processes, and keep the coherence between the initiatives. CDP, CARD, PESCO and EDF, an emerging European defence planning framework which will boost member states' ability to develop capabilities and technologies. We need to turn the EU into a reliable and technologically capable security provider for its citizens. An EU with a more coherent, usable, deployable and sustainable pool of forces. This is in reality the aim of strategic autonomy of the EU, which is closely linked to defence cooperation among member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for what was, as we all expected, very rich insights from you. Now, I think we all agree that, that it is chiefly important for us in the EU institutions to know at all times what are the views of the member states. Member states without the support and active involvement of which there would be no progress on European defense. So it is important for us to know the views of member states on how things are progressing so far, but also their expectations and ideas for the way forward. And I can hardly think of somebody better placed to entertain this issue on behalf of Romania and on behalf of the Romanian presidency of the Council right now than State Secretary Andrei Ignat, who is running the Armaments Department in the Romanian MOD. So without any further ado, State Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to have the presentation in Romania language. În primul rând vreau să vă spun, doamnă.
First of all, I would like to wish you, to all ladies, happy Women's Day and have a nice spring. In what regards EDF, the necessity of this fund appeared from some aspects given by geopolitical instability, by threats, cyber attacks, exceeding the borders of the European Union and also the national borders. Thus, EDF came as a necessity to contribute to the autonomy, strategic autonomy of Europe by the protection of its citizens. EDF will promote the cooperation between the member states in order to produce technologies and defense equipment interoperable. In the European Operation Plan adopted on 30th November 2016, the European Commission committed to complete and to consolidate the efforts of collaboration of the member states in order to develop the technological capabilities and industrial defense capabilities. In order to answer to the challenges and threats at the security of the European Union and also to promote a competitive environment for the defense industry. This proposed the launch of this European Defense Fund in order to support investments in the research and development of products and technologies in defense, promoting the acquisition and the maintenance of the defense equipment at the level of the member states. This fund would complete thus the national funds already used in this purpose in order to simulate a competitive base at the European level. And here I would like to point out the fact that Romania is at the second year in which convened and allocates the 2% for defense, 2% from the GDP, and thus the promotion of interests in national defense industry. The objectives of EDF, thus, I can tell you that will stimulate the investments in SMEs, especially in new setups, in average capital companies and in other providers of defense industry. The fund will be a catalyzer for a scientific and industrial basis and a competitive one able to answer to the needs of European Union through some technologies and interoperable equipment of last generation. By the collection of the resources, the states can obtain more valuable results, developing equipment and technologies that could not be done independently by each member state. EDF will support the cooperation of the consortium in the member states during all the life cycle of the products and technologies in the defense, assuring thus avoiding a possible lack of finance of some testing prototypes of development and valuing the results of the research and innovation. The European Defence Fund thus includes two windows which are complementary. One window of research in order to finance the research in innovative technologies in defense, like electronic devices, encrypted software, or robotics. The committee estimated a budgetary allocation of 4.1 billion euros for 2021-2027. And another window of developing capabilities that would act as financial tool able to facilitate to the member states the participation to acquire commonly some assets in order to reduce the costs for each member state. As dimension, this fund, EDF, should be able to mobilize approximately 13 billion euros for 2021-2027. I would like to point out now the political trialogue led by Romania during its presidency of the European Council. Thus, the legislative file EDF supported efforts from the team within the presidency, and the Ministry of National Defense can praise to have 4 representatives in this council and supports periodically their works. Thus, we participated at all the reunions, EDF, 11 activities till now. Starting with 19th November 2018, our team participated to informational activities with the representatives of the member states, third countries, European Parliament, and companies in the defense industry. And I would give some example, ISD, AmCham helicopters. And also the 1st January, 20th February, we had 3 political dialogues. Within the first trialogues, the results of the negotiations were not positive ones because we created divergences with the European Parliament. But during the trialogue from the 19th of February, the team of the Romanian presidency, led by the Ambassador Luminița Odobescu, obtained the political agreement with the European Parliament regarding the file EDF. Thus, following political marathon, we reached preliminary agreement, common understanding, including the provisions in the file EDF. Meanwhile, elements kept between brackets will be agreed after. Thus, the Romanian presidency proved that the raise of the ambition level led to obtaining this partially agreement, resulted and appreciated unanimously by the member states. The perspectives of the national involvement in EDF. And here I would like to point out the fact that Romania contributes to maintaining the collective security at NATO level, but also at EU level. In the last years, our country has consolidated the strategic functional credibility by participating and leading exercises at a regional, European and NATO level. In the same time, Romania participates to projects of development and research innovation at EU and NATO level. And here I could give you some examples like energetic efficiency, cybersecurity, satellite project together with ROSA agency, and so on. It is very important to be aware of the fact that in order to develop a coherent actions plan within EDF, we have to follow at strategic level some phases to identify the risks and the vulnerabilities on internal level, but also regional, that might affect the national security of Romania, but also of the member states. To identify the operational requests of the forces from the national defense system, to identify opportunities of creating new military capabilities in direct correlation with the necessity to have interoperability to the technological progress of the member states. In this regard, it is necessary to create a national legislative framework including this endeavor in the National Strategy for Defense in the next period, in big lines. In order to be able to participate at consortium of research and development, the national authority in charge to implement EDF should organize a work group in order to identify the topic of interest, also the Ministry of Defense, but also the forces involved in the national defense, to identify potential beneficiaries of EDF, to organize working groups at technical level, Ministry of Defense, Romarm, Patromil, Ministry of Research and Innovation. Thus, in this purpose, we have to reach standards of performance specific to the interoperability with the other member states. In the actual context, it is justified the development of projects of innovation, research, development common with the other states of the European Union by valuing the opportunities of international cooperation. Thus, in the context of implementing the regulation EDF in the period 2021-2027 and participating at this competition, we identified, following of this, some phases to perform consultative actions of command and control that we will perform at the level of the Department for Armament, preparatory actions, and to start the favorable framework of infrastructure and allocating the necessary resources in order to enroll in the best conditions this program. And I refer also to the human resources and material resources to launch the tender for the competition. And I can tell you we have entities eligible for participating at EDF to offer protection and support, but also information regarding the results that we obtain after promoting these phases that I have mentioned. I can add that within the Ministry of National Defense, by the Department of Armament, we have recognized entities of research and development rewarded at the international level in different sectors. And I can list the Technical Military Academy Ferdinand I, the Research Academy in the military sector, and the National Military Institute Cantacuzino. These institutions, I can tell that they have a wide experience in the fields of development and research of products for defense in more sectors. And I can list space capabilities for land forces, naval, cyber defense, informatic technology to prevent disasters and intervention in case of disasters, medical interventions, biological attacks, capabilities for preventing hybrid threats, including psychological ones, capabilities for the protection of militaries and of the environment. I can tell you that the experience accumulated by this department can bring its contribution to EDF through the partnerships concluded at the level of EU and NATO. Thus, we will support with the existent infrastructure the endeavors in order to develop common projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary, for giving us the Romanian perspective on these important European defense developments. And also I'd like to join in the commendation for the achievements of the Romanian presidency delivering key sectoral legislation for the MFF in the area of European defense. That was indeed quite remarkable. Now, let me turn to the final speaker on the panel. He is the head of division and senior expert on defense policy matters in the European External Action Service. And I'm sure Mr. Moelart will give us a unique take on, from his perspective, from the perspective of the EAS, on the topics at hand. So, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the Romanian presidency for inviting me to be here. I've been part and parcel working on these new initiatives since the last few years. And I think it's a very timely topic here today to reflect on where this is potentially going. Going back a little bit in time, in June 2016, when the global strategy was published, this was a very precarious time for the European Union, and the High Representative at the time wrote in the global strategy about existential threats within the Union and beyond. Of course, this was in the context of the recent vote in the UK, but also very much in the changed global security context also in and around Europe. I think that gave really a sense of urgency to address some of the structural issues facing Europe and European defense. And we've launched a number of new initiatives with a number of innovations. First innovation, in a way, was to shift the debate from CSDP as such to wider security and defense. And I think the level of ambition that was formulated by the Council in November 2016 was very much in that context, wider than CSDP, but looking at security and defense more broadly. The key underpinning issue with a number of the initiatives to help implement the new ambitions was the element of cooperation. Cooperation between member states, between institutions across borders to deliver more capabilities in the end. The structural deficit that Europe faced in European defense, of course, being the fragmentation of the defense sector along national lines. 80% of defense investment being invested on a national basis, which leads to a multiplication of defense systems in Europe, which overall undermines the performance, which is not only an EU issue, it's also very much a NATO issue, the European pillar in NATO in particular. So this is where we come from. Changed security context, a number of structural issues to address, and I think we've put in place, with the help of member states, with the help of institutions, a number of groundbreaking new instruments. The permanent structured cooperation was already mentioned, very innovative in the way that for the first time the participating member states have signed up to a number of more binding commitments between one another. Not to the EU as such, but between one another, 20 of them, and this is now being implemented. The coordinated annual review on defense, very much in the hands of the EDA. Again, an innovation which creates a stronger link between what happens at the EU level and at the national level. So looking at national defense planning and the interaction with the EU level agreements. Very important, I think. Finally, the European Defence Fund being very innovative in the way that it now uses the EU budget to support and give financial incentives to defense cooperation in Europe. So I think we have really broken new grounds in a lot of these areas. One important remark that I would like to make at this point is that whatever we do, we also ensure coherence and complementarity with NATO. We pursue the same goals in terms of capabilities and priorities. We're avoiding duplication, and we are also aligning our timelines where we can. It's very clear, and it's a fundamental point, the member states own a single set of forces which they can make available not only to the EU, but also, of course, to NATO, to the UN, or can use them in national contexts. So whatever we do, this is not about a competition with NATO, it's very much about complementarity with NATO, and as you are aware, the EU-NATO cooperation has also been lifted to unprecedented levels following the two joint declarations that were signed by the leaders of EU and NATO over the last few years. So the key issue is for Europeans to take more responsibility for their own security, as the European Council declared in December 2016, which is only possible if Europe becomes more capable. And to become more capable, for our, that is mainly also possible if Europeans cooperate more. So that's why the new initiatives are so important to act as a flywheel for member states to make cooperation the norm increasingly where possible. I think Jorge and other speakers already explained very well the interaction between the different initiatives, which you can see as a kind of an emerging defense planning mechanism, from priority setting to projects to cooperation and at different levels. So I'll not go into that in detail, but I would like to mention indeed, and that's a little bit of Brussels discussion, it's also about very much the actors in Brussels with a different legal basis and their different rules and regulations coming together and trying to work together. As was highlighted, the High Representative plays a key role in this context, as the treaty provides that she's the High Representative for foreign policy, foreign security policy. She's also the Vice President of the Commission, she's the head of the agency, and she also chairs the Foreign Affairs Council. So that gives her a leg, in this case her, a leg into the different pillars and the different institutions. And I think we very much value that as we move forward to foster the coherence between the different initiatives. Coming back to PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation being a very important instrument in this context, which is not only about capability development, but it's also ultimately about making the forces available and increasing the operational availability for CSDP and beyond. And this semester is going to be a very important semester, as the member states have submitted, the participating member states have submitted national implementation plans, which will be for the first time also assessed by the PESCO Secretariat, and there will be a report to the Council. I think it's a very important, almost symbolic moment that we are entering into, because for the first time we'll go through this assessment that was foreseen in the decisions on PESCO. Coming back to the actors, so there are already a number of links between the different processes and different actors. In the permanent structured cooperation, there is a commitment for the participating member states to make use of the CARD process, to make use of the EDF. The EDF in turn uses the CDP that was explained by Jorge very much as the prioritization tool. And it also provides for a so-called PESCO bonus. So if projects that are emerging from the PESCO context are then taken forward in the defense fund, there is an added bonus in terms of co-financing by the EU budget. There's also cross-participation to some extent. So the European External Action Service and the Defense Agency are part of the EDF committee as observers, but also then working together with the colleagues of the Commission. And Commission services can be invited to participate in PESCO projects. This is up to the individual projects, but if there are areas of interest, then I think this is a very clear sign of the added value of the European Union to make sure that there's the synergy also with Commission-led initiatives. So this is what we have at the moment. Where do we go from here? And I think this is very much also where we are in the political debate. We have to, of course, implement, we have to consolidate what has been put in place. But I think increasingly there's also a bit of a reflection ongoing on what is this kind of house that we are building and how do the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And that's why this debate today is so important. How do the different initiatives can be used in a coherent manner to deliver the results that we all are looking for, given the changed security context and the structural deficits that I mentioned from the outset. I think for me, a key issue moving forward is we have created many initiatives, platforms, processes, frameworks. Now they have to be implemented, they have to be filled with content, and that's ultimately up to the member states. Key question, will member states think European? I think for me that's the key point. Think national, think NATO, but also think European, and look for cooperation first. And in moving forward, I think we will have more and more discussion on where do we strike the balance between a bottom-up approach, where member states come forward with initiative, with projects, collaborative projects between different groups of member states, either in the context of PESCO or in the context of the EDF, or whether we can also move to a more, let's call it a top-down, at least a top-down guidance, so that we use the EU instruments like CARD, like the CDP, to identify more and more where Europe needs to have certain projects and commitments. So I think, where do we strike that balance? Where do we strike the balance between the national defense planning and EU-level priorities? I think that's the key issue moving forward. And we have now the instruments, as I mentioned, to make that link and to make sure that we deliver, in the end, the capabilities that Europe needs, and not that industry needs or that individual countries need, but that as a whole Europe needs to create the output that we want. Final word, I would like to then emphasize the role of national parliaments in making this happen in your national setting, in your national context, questioning your governments, pushing your governments to explain and make cooperation the norm when it comes to developing new defense equipment. I think that's a very important point here in this context, and to make sure that in the end member states use the new and very innovative tools and instruments available now at the EU level to foster defense cooperation. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arno, for this very rich and inciting presentation. Now, before I open up the floor for questions and comments, I'd already like to thank all of our panelists for a great job so far, for introducing so well this complex topic. But rich as they might have been their presentations, I'm sure there's a lot of follow-up that's possible on them, and I count very much on you for that. I would kindly ask you to, as you take the floor, indicate, if you so wish, your affiliation. Also indicate to the greatest extent possible to which of the panelists your questions or comments are directed to, and please make it as brief as possible, maximum 2 minutes each. I know it's very hard, but we want to hear from as many of you as possible, and we want to make the best of the time we have with this great panel of ours. So I'm going to, with your concurrence, of course, I'm going to take 3 or 4 questions at a time, if that is not a difficulty with any one of you. And I'd like to invite from a long list the first on it, Mr. Tobias Flüger from Germany. Please.
Hello, I will speak in German. I'm very pleased that we are now dealing with the core issues of our common foreign and security policy and the common security and defense policy. And it is in this context that I would like to explicitly regret that yesterday the High Representative has not been able to answer any questions or to have an exchange with her, because I do believe that this is a core point of this Interparliamentary Assembly here. Now you have outlined the central instruments of the common security and defense policy, and one of these instruments is the European Defense Fund. And there are completely new results as a consequence of the trialogue, where we got a communication from the EU Commission that there's a partial agreement with the European Parliament and the Council. And my question is, in that respect, what in concrete terms has been agreed in this trialogue? One central point in this European Defence Fund is that it is still the case that saying that this is industrial and research policy alone, whereas actually we are talking about military and defense policies. Now, let me be quite concrete. In Article 41(2) of the EU Treaty, it is stated that any spending in connection with military and defense political measures should not be financed through the EU budget. And we, as a faction of the European Parliament, GUE NGL, we have commissioned an expert opinion, and Professor Pișălescu has stated quite clearly that this financing or funding from EU budgets for industrial projects is illegal and violates the EU Treaty Article 41(2). So my question is, are you aware of this expert opinion? And what do you have to say about the fact that we are clearly violating the EU treaties with this European Defence Fund? And in this connection, I would like to ask a very concrete question. How do you see this parliamentary participation, involvement, and parliamentary control of the European Defence Fund? Because now, all of a sudden, there will be funding and a fund for defence and security, and at the level of the individual national parliaments, we have hardly any information about this. In spite of everything, we have very comprehensive ways and means, for example, in the German Bundestag, to monitor and control this. So how do you want to make sure that there's parliamentary control of the European Defence Fund? How do you want to ensure that? Thank you.
Thank you. May I turn now to Mr. Sven Koopmans from the Netherlands, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, I hope a rather concrete question to Mr. Domik and to Mr. Ignat that I asked yesterday to a different panel. We are speaking here about modern security threats. And I've heard some talk about cyber concerns, cyber security. I've heard some talk about hybrid warfare. But in a way, those are already the means of the past. Of course, they are current threats. But we also have new weapons that are already in operation. And I'm talking about drones, drone swarms. I'm talking about killer robots. And they are a new threat. You now have drones already that are smaller than my mobile phone and that you can operate by the thousands. And you can have them operate anonymously. You can have them operate everywhere, even inside this room. And they can be targeted. And they can be used not just by enemy states, but also by terrorist groups, by criminals. And so if we talk about modern warfare and the need to protect our citizens, we should also have a strategy to deal with this, and we need to have the capabilities to defend ourselves against those things. And I wonder whether our panelists can say what we are doing to defend ourselves and to have a strategy. And what do you think that we as parliamentarians should do to keep our people safe? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to Mrs. Sigurbjørnsdóttir. That was, I hope, very close to how it really sounds. Please, Madam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. That was a very good pronunciation of my name. Let me first thank the organizers for their warm hospitality here in Bucharest, and thank the speakers for their most interesting and informative remarks. This is more of a comment on the International Women's Day than a question. Gender equality is at the heart of Iceland's foreign policy, and I feel obliged to respectfully point out the lack of women among the keynote speakers in this conference. Yes. Yesterday we had 2 all-male panels, and we have one again today. In this regard, I would like to refer to EU strategic approach to women, peace and security, which stresses, amongst other things, women's inclusion and participation in foreign policy and security debate. We should strive to live up to that goal in our internal work as well. This is not in any sense a criticism of the conference's excellent speakers, but rather a reminder that we need to be attentive to gender balance concerns. Thank you.
much. Duly noted. Je prends une dernière question maintenant et je me tourne.
Joël Guerriot. Thank you very much. I will take the floor in the name of the French delegation. CSDP has known important progress during the past 3 years. The European of Defense takes shape. And then 1 year ago, a program was launched, and there was then a type of skepticism with respect to our capacities to cope. But we make progress. 34 projects are already being implemented, and we need to do more. But we need to pay heed. We need not disseminate or disperse our efforts. Good coordination means, first and foremost, ensuring the capacity of our devices, capabilities of our devices. I would like to congratulate you with respect to EDF progress, but we need to be mindful of the convergence of the goals. We need to have this convergence to keep to it in the future MFF. We have made significant progress. EU is now investing in strengthening the future efforts. The North Atlantic Alliance remains the quintessential element of our collective security architecture. We need to be very clear about it. It is the essential alliance that protects us all. European defense is first and foremost a set of bilateral cooperations already existing and fruitful. For instance, we are very keen on maintaining our ties with the UK, irrespective of the outcome of Brexit. The Secretary General of the European Defence Agency. Can you tell me, sir, how will we be able to reach agreement between the European dimension and the NATO dimension and the balance between the bilateral cooperation agreements that were already signed? Here is my question to you.
Important political points that were made and also challenging questions. I would kindly ask panelists to take them up. I guess the issue of parliamentary control over EDF and the risks posed by potential access, illegal access to killer drones or drone swarms. They were directed to the State Secretary, but of course, if other panelists would like to make points on the same questions, feel free to do so. State Secretary, perhaps you would like to enlighten us on.
Thank you very much for your questions, first of all. Regarding the first question, also I would like to answer in Romania.
Now, with respect to the trilogue, you asked me what are the concrete measures or the concrete outcomes of this trilogue. I can tell you in concrete terms that consensus was reached, and that's very important, taking into account the fact that after 6 months, when the Austrian delegation had this dossier or file, a lot of negotiations were ongoing. Finally, we reached agreement in this respect, or consensus. You're right, we need to focus more on the implementation of common implementation standards. There are synergies amongst the states which wish to develop common capabilities. And why not? We need to pay attention to first treat national, regional threats. That's a question. Or look to the European threats and have a top-bottom approach, or national to regional approach. That is actually our challenge, and that is why we need at least 3 member states so that they can identify threats, joint or common operational needs, and so that these states could identify the means that we could use to cope with these common threats, either at the level threats at the level of the EU or at regional level or at national level. So that is by and large in order to address the first question. When it came to your second question, the way I understood it was that you wanted to be given advice. What should MPs do in the case of these threats such as killer robots, drones, cyber warfare? You're right. These threats exist. We are all aware of them. And EDF, I suppose, is aimed particularly at that, to reach, to find common solutions, to have member states join into partnerships in order to better identify these threats, which entity coordinates them, and how can we, or what we can do to fight those. I'm not here to give any lesson, and I think that the experts of each country could discuss and debate better the threats, and that is by debate that we can propose a common course of action. We are not. We did not set out to compete with NATO, but NATO is basically aimed at it, to combat the entire spectrum of threats, be they cyber threats or hybrid threats, and so on and so forth. And what I can assure you is that if you keep good contact with the European Commission and the experts of each member state, you will get all your answers. Of course, when the European Parliament approves the European Defence Fund. Thank you.
Probably add to the issue of national parliamentary control over the European Defence Fund that we are at the Commission, but I'm sure this is true for other European institutions with a role to play in this regard, that we're doing the best outreach we can with capitals, both executive branch and parliaments alike. Maybe we're not doing that enough, but we are ready to remedy that. That is for sure. And afterwards, once we will have a new MFF and we will have a much larger European Defence Fund to work with, I can assure you that there will be the same transparency, that we will continue to implement it in the so-called double comitology procedure, meaning that there will be an ample role for member states to define and oversee priorities, and they are of course operating, their governments are of course operating under the subject to the parliamentary oversight that each of our member states is having. But again, we could do some more. I'm not sure if any of the panelists would like to take up the criticism regarding the monogender composition of this panel. It's not our fault, but we plead guilty for that, especially on this day. If any one of you would like to support me in that in the taking of the blame, feel free to do so. If not, I'd perhaps ask Jorge Domecq to take up the point on EU-NATO articulation in running these European defense initiatives, and also the point, the very important point that Mr. Guerriot made on the fact that bilateral cooperation, plurilateral cooperation between member states, I'd like to add, is playing in this regard. So Jorge, please.
Thank you. Just a moment on the gender issue. If it would have been my predecessor was a woman, but What I do tell you is in the agency we take seriously the aspects of gender, but being a military-based agency, we reflect very much also the composition of the armed forces of our member states. So we will be able to advance as much as we advance also in that domain. Now, coming back, if I could, to complement what the State Secretary and Minea has just said about the European Defence Fund, about if it's only to support industry or it's going into the defense domain, I would just point to a very clearly stated position in the regulation that the work program should be consistent with the CDP priorities, so the capability development priorities. What are the capability needs of member states? Because I don't think that any responsible governing body would like to invest in something which industry would be very happy, our research centers very happy, but then had no use by our armed forces. So I will not get into the issue of legality, which is not my mission to do. It will be for the Commission and for the Parliament to look into. But I think that the best use of the resources and that we are able to provide to our citizens the needs for a better protection is a must. And the best way to do that is to make sure that they follow the prioritization both in technological terms but also in capability. The other thing, apart from the role that the European Parliament, of course, has as far as any EU budget and on having an oversight over it, the national parliaments have an important role to play in these initiatives, as both Arnaud and I said before, because you will be able to ask your national governments what are they doing about the results of these different tools, about CARD, about PESCO, and how they are implementing them also with the incentive of the European Defence Fund. As for the aspect of the drones, killer robots, and all the aspects related to the new technologies. First, I would make a point on hybrid. Hybrid is now a direct part of the capability development priority process. When we are looking into the defense capabilities, we are looking at them also from the perspective of how they can be used in a hybrid context. For example, we are looking into how to counter mini drones or how to protect harbor or critical infrastructure, especially in the energy point. So that is part of the capability development plan. And if we go to the disruptive technologies, or the new technologies, there I would point that if you go through the capability development priorities, there is one which is devoted to these cross-cutting technologies. And here I would just pause for a moment on one, which is artificial intelligence, which is going to become central to our life at large, but its application to the defense domain will also be important. And here I think national parliaments in Europe, but the European Parliament, have a lot to do to promote the investment in artificial intelligence. And I will just give you one figure. All what Europe, the 27 European member states, invest in research and development in defense across the board in Europe today equals 8.8 billion euros. The United States, only in artificial intelligence, invests 7.1 billion. So it's not a question of being a smart follower in the future. It is really getting lost in the mist. So we really have to speed up and make sure that nationally we are devoting enough funds to this aspect. And then I would like to make a clear line here another area where national parliaments and the European Parliament can help us is, of course, we have to establish the rules for the automation and use of artificial intelligence in the defense domain. And they have to be in compliance with international law and with the humanitarian law. But we should not allow our approach to these technologies to prevent research from continuing. Why? Because it's going to happen. And it's not only about killer robots. In many occasions, it will give us the possibility to protect our own armed forces deployed in operations, to protect populations in areas where those operations are going to go, because artificial intelligence is not only about possible use of killer robots. There are many other aspects, from protecting logistics to reducing an error in the use of any of the systems. Now, finally, coming to the question on how these initiatives relate to both NATO but also the bilateral relations. First, I would say that our cooperation with NATO from the EU institutions is now stronger than in the past. As you know very well, we are carrying forward 74 actions, which in some cases there are processes, and I would just pick one, which is one where the agency is devoting a lot of effort. It is to ensure that the priorities that we are taking forward in the EU are not diverging. They might not be the same, but they are not diverging. They are complementary to what NATO needs. But also we are making sure that the projects that we developed are serving the countries both in the EU format but in NATO, so downstream as far as the... Now, as far as the other multinational groupings or bilateral, this has never been a problem because, as you know, one of the advantages of the agency is the flexibility to work with a group of countries. At present, in the agency, we have around 100 ad hoc projects in research and capabilities where you have 2, 3, 10, 15 countries participating. And if I come to the aspect of UK, when UK becomes a third state, the same as we have today administrative arrangement we have with Norway, which is the 7th most active state in the agency by the number of ad hoc projects. Nothing will prevent the UK from also cooperating in many of these ad hoc projects with other member states.
Very briefly, I'm conscious of the time. No, just to add on the technology discussion, just to add that this is, of course, where the defense sector can contribute a lot. It's a new threat. It opens up new opportunities in terms of capability development, but it's also very much an issue, a wider issue for law enforcement, for example. So there's a whole range of developments in the European Union, and I think one of the interesting aspects currently is that we also try to make sure that we know the different branches of the Commission and with the Defense Agency and other players to make sure that we have a mapping and an awareness of the different actions ongoing in this domain.
Thank you very much. I would just briefly add that on the issue of legality, that everything that was done, and I'm speaking here for the Commission, be it the preparatory action on defense research or the EDIDP, was firmly based in sound legal basis, namely research policy, our prerogatives, our competencies given by the treaty in research policy and industrial competitiveness. So that was the basis we felt comfortable with, and we make sure at every step that we don't exceed those prerogatives. Now, I think we don't want to impede on the next panel. We don't want to, in no way, to upset Mrs. Gomes. I certainly don't want that. So there still are six remaining interventions. I think I have to close the list there. We'll take all 6 of them. Please be as brief as possible, so we can still have a comeback on those questions and conclude. I have Mr. George Karoulas from Cyprus now. Please.
Good morning. We are watching with significant attention all the advancements regarding PESCO. And we mostly hope that the future European defense will be autonomous, independent, and in line with international law. In your opinion, to what extent will PESCO promote and support investments based on state-to-state agreements and aiming at regional stability, solidarity, and European energy security, having in mind existing and potential threats for the sovereignty of the eastern border of EU and the prevention of exploitation of natural resources by third countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think next is Mr. Carlos Rojas from Spain.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I want to thank you for the Romanian delegation for this journey. Fantastic work. And I would like to thank to the panel for their great speeches, especially to Mr. Domecq, our colleague from Spain. Y quiero preguntar, en orden de la lucha.
And I would like to ask regarding the fight against mafia and illegal migration and against terrorism that has to be coordinated at the level of European Union, at member states level and NATO. Mafia business has $7 billion annually. It's moved in this illegal business, and I would like to know what is being done in this aspect. In the defense industry, in the defense sector, and regarding terrorism to all kinds of mafia operating in this area. What progress and what strategies are there in order to fight these organizations and their economic interests? What progress exists in the defense strategy in what regards the borders protection? And I would like to add that we cannot oblige the countries cannot give an isolated answer to these mafia threats. And it's necessary a common answer of the European Union, a joint answer. It will be more complicated to do this, to fight against this threat only together.
Mulțumesc, merci mult, merci beaucoup. I'd like to, I'll be very brief. It's more a comment, not really a question. I compliment the speakers for their thoughts, for their work, and this is apparently, to my mind, perhaps the only policy today in the European Union where we can have a consensus. So what we need is a strong consensus in defense policy. This is where we can have most of the countries in the West and most of the countries in the East. But what we need is more than these mechanisms, which are very positive and which represent the groundwork, a basis. We need action. It is the European Union which has to take care of security and stability on our continent. Today, it's still NATO. Look at the Western Balkans, North Macedonia, Montenegro. We are in favor of them acceding to NATO. But it is NATO, more or less, taking care of our security on the European continent. What we need if you want to be a global actor, it is us, the European Union, which has to take care of the security, stability of our continent. So the groundwork has been done. Compliments to you. Now we need action from our politicians and the governments in the European Union. Mulțumesc, merci mult, merci beaucoup.
That was great, thank you very much. I now turn to Mrs. Donatella Tesei from
Italy.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I would like to join the previous colleagues in thanking the Romanian parliamentary delegation for the organization of this meeting. Obviously, the issues dealt with in the context of yesterday's panel were very interesting and could have led to further in-depth consideration. Unfortunately, the missing connection with the High Representative have preempted us from getting into the details of a couple of issues. But I would like to focus on the issue of European defence, also because I'm the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Defence of the Italian Senate. The European Union is in a predicament for a number of reasons, and the defence sector is one of the few sectors where, unlike other sectors, a lot of progress has been made. And this could seem a paradox, in a way, considering that the issue of defence is a highly sensitive issue for individual member states. Unfortunately, if there is cooperation and if there is the contribution that we have the efforts of all member states to strengthen the European defence system, then of course this becomes a goal that is becoming deliverable and that we must pursue. And I have a question. Over the last few months, the Italian government, supported by Parliament, together with other governments, has made efforts to improve the EDF regulation. And I'm thinking to a number of aspects which are key, not only for Italy, but also for other countries, like avoiding exceptions to the principle of cooperation among at least 3 countries, enhancing small and medium-sized enterprises in the defence sector, in consideration of the indirect costs, and so on and so forth. But now we have reached a more or less a final stage. We have talked in details about PESCO and European defence systems, but I would like to put a question to you. In your opinion, how likely is it that the European Defence Fund is agreed on before the elections of the new European Parliament? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comment and for the question that we're noting duly. Mrs. Ana Gomes, please.
Thank you. We've seen a long way since the European Defence Agency was created at the end of 2003 with a roadmap to addressing the capabilities shortcoming, and also even in the assumption of a Europe of defence, of a union of defence. But at the same time, we have seen the yielding of control, of European control, over strategic sectors, critical infrastructure such as ports, such as energy networks of several European countries, my own, Portugal, but also Greece and others, to foreign powers, namely to China. Indeed, putting in question all the effort that is done to create an industrial base of defense, European defense, and to ensure indeed strategic autonomy for Europe. I would like to stress that this has happened, namely in Portugal and Greece, under the Troika supervision, in total contradiction with what we are supposed to achieve in the framework of a Europe of security and defense. Now, big questions are put to several member states on the question of the 5G network and whether we are going to grant it to Huawei or actually have our own or rely on other systems. I think there are crucial questions for European strategic autonomy and European security and defense there. How are we answering them? Thank you.
Very good and timely question and query indeed. Thank you very much for this intervention. I now turn to Mr. Richard Kols from Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a very specific question. I mean, we all here salute all the new initiatives that Europe has uptaken for the past 2 or 3 years or so. And of course, we have, you know, a great interest on these projects to be working in practice. And in particular with the EDF, the question is how the smaller partners that are, you know, new to the military industry in Europe could be a part of this chain. And the question comes, if we talk about the public financial instruments, which is, you know, European citizens, taxpayers' money, everything comes down to public procurement. We can have projects, and then, you know, subsequently at the member state level, we have the public procurement procedures. My question would be, how can we enhance that the cross-country cooperation with joint public procurement can be established, both either among 2 member states, 3 member states, you name it, maybe it's even 10 member states, if it's even feasible and possible, and if there are such projects, and of course European Commission will be the one that will, you know, draft the guidelines on how these projects should be implemented in the member states and then consequently the public procurement procedures. Should we also have very strict requirements in regards that the junior partners are involved either as R&D, because there is no secret. I mean, we have, what, like 6, 7 major players in military industry in Europe. So therefore, I see it, of course, it's a very attractive piece of joint 13 billion for the next 7 years. But the question is how we involve, you know, smaller players among the member states. And just to finalize, somebody might think, you know, okay, in Latvia, what capabilities do you have? But look, in 20th century, before the Soviet occupation, Latvia was, you know, building planes and selling planes. So there's a lot of potential in the member states to actually, if we have joining forces together, have a very good way of really not pouring financial resources into big industries, but really establishing a close cooperation that comes very in hand with the cohesion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Joško Klišović from Croatia, please.
Thank you very much. I would just like to reflect on the fact which was raised by Mr. Molinar from EAS, and I consider it very important. You said that it's important to strike the right balance between national and common European interests in defense matters. Of course, for effective defense, this is crucial, I would say. And whatever the format of defense cooperation we're talking about, if that balance is not struck, then we have a major problem. My question is, are we currently heading to the right direction? Are we heading to strike the right balance or not? Or are we faced with a situation where a number of member states are really trying to develop a common European interest in defense matters, while others are not that interested in the matter? So we are heading basically to multi-speed Europe, which would weaken cohesion of European Union and its unity. So another question is, what should happen to stimulate member states' leaders and nations to start to believe in European defense, to understand that no one can really achieve security in isolation, and then joint European defense is a good answer to our security concerns. Of course, we should develop international partnerships, in particular with the United States, but if we speak with a common voice and common interest, we would be a much more reliable partner to the United States and others on the international scene than if we speak as member states, which are really differently in terms of military leverage and political clout. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The absolutely last intervention, Mr. Pavel Fischer from the Czech Republic.
Thank you very much for the floor. My name is Pavel Fischer. I come from Prague, from the Senate. And I would like to rely on the previous topic raised by our Portuguese colleague from the European Parliament. She spoke about Chinese influence in Europe and in new technologies. I think that we touch upon a very strategic issue that we have to consider with a great level of insight and also of strategic courage to project ourselves in the future. Since this is not only a matter of competitiveness of European societies and European enterprises, but this is also a heart of security and defense matters that we have to address together as Europeans. While responding to this challenge, we have to keep in mind fundamental freedoms that we have to stick on while treating this issue. Providing strategic autonomy for European member states is something extremely costly in the world of today. And my question goes to the European Defence Fund. Could you just imagine that while the solution is not on the shelf for the time being, that European Defence Fund could provide a boost or an investment or a call for proposals in order to propose solution for European member states which would comply with our security and strategic autonomy struggle while respecting fundamental freedoms and values of European Union. Since we know that the Chinese solution is backed by Communist Party regime based on totalitarian view of human kind that ignores what is cherished by European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of important and challenging questions that have been voiced. Also some valuable comments that we can definitely relate to. I'll propose that we go from left to right, that you pick the questions that are the most relevant for your area of interest, and then if not everything is covered, I'll try to fill in to the best of my ability. So, State Secretary, please.
Aș vrea să mulțumesc tuturor celor care au făcut comentarii și ne-au adresat.
Thank you to all who have addressed their remarks. Indeed, all of the all the questions are challenging. I will not answer to all. I could still draw a red line for what has been said now. It is obvious that we will not have to double our security with the NATO security. We have to be aware of the fact that Romania and also the member states doing acquisitions in procurement in the defense sector. Yes, we'll have to answer to the operational capabilities, but they are available by NATO and will become NATO capabilities. As the European Union has missions and responds according to the commitments taken, also the countries will do as such. Indeed, CSDP answers to many threats, and it has to identify the new threats. mafia, illegal migration, and so on. Only that they are not the object of army or but more of border police and internal police. From my point of view, indeed, the main challenge will be cooperation between 3 and more states, even more states, in order to identify the operational needs and in order to identify the capabilities we really need. I wouldn't like to monopolize the discussion. I would like to thank all of you for your remarks and questions, and we will take into account each of your remarks, and we will try to find a legal framework and a technical framework. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, State Secretary. Let me pick just one up and alleviate a little bit the burden of so many interesting and challenging questions. Pick the one on whether it is possible or what are the expectations that the EDF is agreed before elections. This is a sectoral MFF legislation. As I think the State Secretary indicated at the beginning, it was possible to reach a partial general agreement on the Council side on this one, and after trialogue to create the conditions for a first reading in the European Parliament. Now, with regard to this sectoral regulation, but more generally as well, the expectation and the best scenario is that once we have general agreement on the overall financial framework, on the big figures, somewhere beginning of fall at the level of our leaders, then the European Parliament will be amenable to very swiftly go to what is called an early second reading, and therefore have this legislation and MFF as such in place, so that we can start implementing a lot of programs, not the least being the ones that are relevant for European defense. So I hope we can count this out. May I turn to Jorge now for...
Very swiftly, first on the issue of PESCO and how it can project also security and defense in Europe, even in all regions, no? Because it's not foreseen for any specific region. The only thing you have to keep in mind that PESCO is a marriage in defense, not thought in terms of a specific regional threat or risk. Secondly, as far as the aspects raised by Mr. Rojas against the fight against terrorism, mafia, the agency doesn't take care of that as such, but what we do is ensure that many of the investments that are done from the research point of view and from the training point of view with law enforcement agencies, which coincide with what our military need, we are doing it. For example, we are doing so with the cyber defense agencies of the Commission, and we are doing it also, for example, for Frontex, for many of the aspects of control of borders, both in the investment of research and defense and in training aspects. I agree with Mr. Kovac that is now the time for the political level to put into place the groundwork, but I would say it is now time for member states. Don't look to the EU institutions. It's now for the member states to do it and to embed it in your systems, because if not, these initiatives will remain on the surface and will not provide the aspects. And as far as NATO taking care of the security of Europe, true, and we continue to hope to that to have to be the case. But I would just point to two of the main challenges in the security and defense domain that Europe has today, where the EU is having a very active role, which is one, contributing to the control of borders with uncontrolled migration flows, and counterterrorism. See who is on the streets today in all our cities in Europe, and you will see the connection. for the aspect of strategic autonomy and the investments in strategic domains. One thing I think is very important that we say here, that strategic autonomy is a must. It's not a protectionist vision of where investments can do, which many times is denigrated in that way. What we are trying to do, especially in the defense domain, where more and more it's more difficult to separate what is those industries and those research domains which are of interest to the civil domain or to the defense domain, is to identify at European level those industrial skills, know-how that we need to protect and promote and keep European, so that the European Defence Fund, but also other regulatory and financial instruments of the EU can help us to keep them purely European. So we are doing a prioritization because we won't be able to cover all the sectors. Now, having said that, as we speak, I am also worried that there are many industries which today we don't consider in the sensitive point. For example, in robotics, look at the investments that are happening from the Chinese side that have gone up to 100% in the last 10 years. Some of these robotic companies are the ones who are subcontractors of our defense companies, our main defense companies. So we have to be really careful. And here coming to the question of how the European Defence Fund can benefit smaller countries and their defense industry where there is not a robust defense industry. Here I would say, first of all, the European Defence Fund will not change the rules of procurement in Europe, which is it's a fake news which is tossed about a lot. Secondly, we have to forget that defense is a market. If we treat the aspects of defense as from a market perspective, we will not produce the good results. That's why it is so important, because I heard you saying, well, the Commission will give the guidelines of how the projects have to be developed. No, if that is the case, in the defense domain, that doesn't work. It will have to be the end users. And finally, I would say that if I look at the startups who have innovation, your country and several of the Baltic republics have very good opportunities to be in the disruptive technologies we will need. And one last point on strategic autonomy and using it to give a boost, with having at the same time the possibility of having off the shelf. Well, I think Europe needs to wake up. I'm not going to give you just 3 figures. We are now, together all the European countries, investing in defense. We have grown by 41 billion euros. In 2020, we will be investing 100 billion euros in defense investment, not the defense budget, defense investment. And in 2024, we will be spending 350 billion euros. So if we are not capable of ensuring that we have the strategic autonomy, then I think we are on the wrong course.
Thank you very much. Very good points. Thank you. No, very briefly, so the critical success factor moving forward on European defense is to look at the nexus between the EU-level instruments and initiatives and national planning. Here I think it's really critical that national ministries integrate the EU-level initiatives and priorities into the national policy, into national procurement decisions, et cetera, et cetera. That's the only way I think that this ultimately will deliver effect. And this requires a bit of a change in mindset in some cases, not in all cases. And it requires a change in management processes inside ministries. That takes time, but I think this is critical that also the political level keeps the pressure on national ministries and national governments to make those changes in the national system, the national processes and procedures, to look at European options, to look at bilateral, multilateral defense cooperation options. And that's the only way we can drive this agenda forward.
Well, thank you so much. To put it very, very short, I guess it is clear we would have needed the double of the time we had at our disposal to deal with these heavy but interesting topics. I, however, read this as a sign of interest, a clear sign of interest from your side. And also, I guess the other important point that was made was that this area of European defense is and it should be an area of consensus. Our colleague from Croatia made a very forceful point in that regard. I hope this will translate into absolutely vital parliamentary support and European parliamentary support for the work that's still lying ahead, especially when it comes to the adoption of the EDF and of the legislation, the related legislation that's concurring to delivering the EDF. We very much need that kind of support from you. I guess we all have as a takeaway the need to expose ourselves more to exchanges with national parliaments and European Parliament alike, and we would gladly engage into that. With a very warm word of appreciation and gratitude to our hosts today for a superb organization of this event, with the hope that we would benefit from the forgiveness of Mrs. Ana Gomes for eating away from the time allocated to the next panel, but I guess you would agree that was for a good reason and for a substantial discussion. I'd now kindly ask all of you to join me in a round of applause for our great speakers today. Thank you very much.
Mulțumim mult pentru aprecieri, mulțumim.
Thank you very much for your appreciation for participation and implication involvement. In 15 minutes, our colleagues will show you the way to the rooms to be used for the workshops.